Welcome to Maine, we're stretched to the bone. Prices keep rising, the paycheck stays prone. Inflation keeps knocking, won't leave us alone. They're selling the lie, groceries climbing, the gas tank is low. The bill's hitting harder than snow, but silence still blankets the truth. Where does it go? They're selling the lie. Housing is gridlocked from Portland to the county. Workers commute far past what feels soundly. Talk of solution comes yearly, not loudly. They're selling the lie. They're selling the lie. Say every voice counts, but watch who gets lifted. Some stories vanish, some get the spotlight shifted. Depends on what trends and what keeps them gifted. They're selling the lie. I won't believe them, I wanna believe, but truth's always stuck in between. Static and spin, drown the signal again. Nothing is what it seems. I wanna believe you, but every headline turns daylight into redesigned skies. Facts get twisted, context missing. We choke on the simplified alibis. Wanna believe you, but all I see is shadows where the answers should shine. The fact is fiction.
Welcome to the Muddy Waters Podcast, where Mainers tell their stories, unfiltered.
Good afternoon, Maine. This is Chuck Ellis, and you are watching the Muddy Waters Podcast yet again. 2 episodes in a day. I hope you're all ready for it. But we exist here to help the people of Maine better understand what's going on in our state. And we do that primarily by interviewing people from around the state, whether they're elected officials or individuals, business owners, pastors, like we did earlier, or whoever it may be. If they've got a story to tell that we want to make sure the people of Maine have an opportunity to hear about. Unfortunately, the mainstream media has, by and large, become a propaganda arm of the Democrat Party, and so they only tell you the stories that help advance that agenda. And so we are one of the people that are trying to speak up and give people a voice, and the people to be able to hear things that you might not hear elsewhere. The other thing we do is partly it's through this conversation where with somebody sharing their story. It's a lot harder. It's easy for the left to take short snippets and be able to argue against it. But when you hear somebody's story, I think it makes a much more significant impact. And that's why these long form interviews make sense. I don't expect everybody to take the time to listen to every single episode. However, for people who are trying to understand something, I think these can be really helpful. And the short clips, be sure to like, share, and subscribe, and share those is really how we kind of build the movement and get more information out there to be able to, advance, our movement of common sense governance in our state, which is what we're pushing for. And today, we're fortunate to have with us Charlie Turgeon, who was relatively recently elected to the town council in Lisbon. Thanks for joining us again.
Yeah, thanks, Chuck. It's good. It's good to be back. Definitely a lot's changed since then. I've gotten to sit at the table now and see behind the curtain a little more, and so I'm excited to talk about today what I've learned, what I've really learned, and what I think the future of Maine and for Maine citizens could be if we were able to actually focus in and apply some discipline and common sense.
Absolutely. Well, it's interesting because in prepping for this, you had kind of sent me some information about what you were hoping to talk about. And I saw some stuff in it that was really interesting to me because I keep talking to my city council and talking about ways to cut spending. And they keep trying to say that, no, we have to keep increasing spending. And so you seem to suggest that fiscal reform is possible, which is what we named this episode. And, my people are telling me opposite. So hopefully you can help me understand how that's possible.
Yeah. And so, first and foremost, I'll speak on behalf of me, not the Council of Lisbon. We are a 7-member council, all elected at large, and I am one of those members. But so, for me personally, I got involved because during the COVID era, I was volunteering in my daughter's classroom, and my wife teaches in the same school district. So I'm very in tune with what's going on, but I was volunteering finally in my daughter's classroom, and I noticed that there was quite a few kids in the classroom, and I thought, okay, well, that's good. That means, people are moving to our town. People want to invest in our town. People are excited to raise their families here. But I noticed also, like, at the same time, like, teachers, I've known the struggle since my wife became a teacher back in 2011, that, parents have to help provide supplies, and they have to help provide what's necessary to get the students over the line every year. And they work with organizations like PTOs, PTAs, and they do all this amazing work. But at the same time, I noticed my town was sort of buying new vehicles and adding new positions. In fact, they had taken some people out of the school district and put them in different positions in the town. And I was kind of like, well, that's interesting. Like, why didn't we have that position before? I mean, the town never had that kind of money to buy that amount of trucks all at once. We didn't have all these things. And so, I started kind of thinking, I can get involved. My professional life has basically been about finding, missing information in contracts and finding inefficiencies. And I assumed that it was just, hey, somebody smarter than me is just missing something, right? So somebody on the finance committee is there. They're just not seeing it. It's got to be somewhere. I just have to zoom in. I can find the detail and find out what's going on. And what I ultimately ended up finding was, and as many of the viewers probably know, is these towns in Maine and across America have some real structural deficits. And they were sort of propped up and masked by artificial inflation during the COVID era and the ARPA funds. And so what I found was we had sort of set ourselves up for recurring expenses that weren't going to be matched by recurring revenues. And flash forward to we inevitably needed a pretty significant tax increase in Lisbon last year of 27%. And I just felt morally that was so wrong to do to people. That was so horrible to do to senior citizens, people trying to raise families. Even though they might have their tax payment in an escrow, a 27% spike is inexcusable. And I think many of the professionals involved in many different varieties would agree that that's unacceptable, because we all ultimately pay taxes, whether they're state, federal, or local taxes. But the idea of basically not getting buy-in from the bottom up and just sort of doing these things and then telling everyone, well, I mean, you received these services, you just didn't pay for them. It didn't really sit well with me. So then you flash forward to me running for the council and trying to help out. So here you have a guy who was at one point complaining about town councils, who's now serving on the town council. Ultimately what I ended up finding out was long-range planning basically didn't exist. They hadn't really planned for how they were going to replace all these things that they had bought with one-time stimulus. They really didn't plan on what it would look like 3, 4, 5 years down the road. And so this year as on council, we worked very hard. One of the things I kept stressing was that, if we are going to keep all of these services, the taxpayers ultimately have to, Blue Angels practice run. If we're going to keep all these services, we have to ultimately increase taxes, or we have to decrease scope. And the community sort of went through some growing pains this year with coming to grips with that yes, mistakes were made. Those people are no longer with, the town, but, we just can't live in the past forever. We eventually have to find the way forward. And the way forward this year ended up being, we were able to keep the municipal tax rate flat. So it is possible. Chuck, there's good news there. Ultimately, county and school were the only increases that taxpayers in Lisbon would get. And I felt that was a success, because it allowed the community to start having the conversation at least. And whether they agree or disagree with the councilors ultimately wasn't really what we were sent there to do. We were basically tasked with stopping the trajectory. And I feel like we were able to do that. And now the community is much more engaged in the conversation as we move forward. And so me personally, I think that's a success. Again, whether you agree with me, disagree with me, whatever, we'll figure it out together as a community, because that's just that's just kind of what I believe. I believe in bottom up and, think globally, act locally.
Yeah, no, I think that makes a lot of sense. And I think it's just really encouraging to look at a situation where, I think there are a lot of people that maybe are hopeful and optimistic about like us being able to, make changes statewide. I think that change is needed in Augusta, both in terms of the House, the Senate, and the governorship. I think if we're looking realistically, you know, uh, the House I think is in play for the Republicans to be able to take that in the state of Maine. I think the Senate is possible, but it's going to be tough. And I think the governor's race. I mean, the polls that recently came out don't terribly surprise me. I think there's some hope if we can effectively, tie all of the bad policies that have led to all the financial challenges that are connected to what you're talking about. Because our state government did the same thing that our local governments did, which effectively what you're saying is that, whether it was the schools or the towns or the state government, a bunch of money flew in during COVID from stimulus. And that with all of those things, which were all temporary monies, people made permanent increases to their budgets, which is one of the reasons that we've had substantial tax increases, both for our schools and for our cities and towns. As well as our state government, right? We went from like when Mills got elected, I don't know, like 7 billion approximately to 13, 12, maybe 12 billion, I think is what we're at the moment, 12 and some change. And like a big part of that happened post COVID. And just with continuing now, okay, we've got these expenses, we've got to keep adding, we've got to, keep growing the government, I guess. I'm all for growth in business unless the business is the government. Then I'm not for growth in business. At least not. Well, there is even an opportunity there, but that's a whole nother situation that comes through. I think if you create a good enough economic situation, businesses will grow and your tax revenue will grow, not because you're increasing taxes, but because more economic activity is happening, which is opportunity for taxation. I'm okay with that. But not more than we need to spend, essentially. But anyway, you had this situation. Right. You had all this unnecessary spending, and what's interesting is like the perspective of a lot of people in government. I know when it comes to town and city councils and things like that, there's no partisanship or whatever. But when it comes to like spending, there's a significant segment of the population that does not care about the consequences. They think we'll just tax it, we'll add on, and there's going to be no negative consequences. We can do it. I think this is the attitude that they have. I remember a family member of mine, I won't name the exact one so I don't shame them, suggested during the Obama era that, we needed to like have universal health care because, and I was like, but how are we going to afford it? He's like, we will. It's like, okay, yeah, but how? Right? Like there was this idea that just because I think it would be a good thing for everyone to have healthcare, therefore we will make it so that everyone can have healthcare. And it's like, okay, but there is a cost associated with this. And I'm not sure that it makes sense in practical reality to be able to do that. If it did, why would nobody have done it before? Right? I think that's one of the questions that we can ask, or done it effectively. So anyway, but I think there's this like turning off of the brain and just saying, well, we can do it. We just need to vote in favor of doing it. And therefore we just do it. And then again, we end up dealing with the repercussions. I'm talking way too much, but anyway, I think it's fascinating. I think, and it's encouraging to hear that, there are places, would we call Lisbon in southern Maine? It's kind of on the border. Is that southern Maine or northern? We'll call it southern Maine.
I call it southern Maine because I'm gonna toot Lisbon's horn a little bit. Lisbon has a premier location in Maine. We are 20 minutes from Lewiston, Auburn, 20 minutes from Bath, Brunswick, 30 minutes from Portland, 30 minutes from Augusta. I mean, there is, if you're looking to, bring a business into a place where you're going to get traffic, Lisbon is a bread and butter community for that, right? So one of those things that you're just kind of hinted to was what can governments do to actually develop economic activity in their communities? And in Lisbon, our location is so perfect. I mean, I bought in Lisbon I grew up in Durham across the bridge, but I lived in Lisbon since 2013. And one of the things I did it because my wife was teaching in Lewiston at the time, and I worked at BIW in Bath. And so it was 20 minutes for me, 20 minutes for her. All the amenities were close by. If you needed to go into Portland for the day, you could, but you didn't have to live with. I mean, I'm just not a fan of that kind of living down there. So. If I have to go, I can, and when I don't want to, I don't have to. Honestly, to bring it back, but yeah, Lisbon is technically a southern Maine community, but Androscoggin County. So we do struggle with some of the spillover effects of having to deal with Lewiston and Auburn basically getting to run the gamut at times because that's where the majority of the population in the entire county is. But Lisbon is the third biggest municipality in Androscoggin County, just shy of 10,000 residents per the last census. We're probably over that now, but I don't want to make a speculation as the total number. But yeah, we are technically a southern Maine community who is currently navigating the post-COVID stimulus Maine. And I think that what we're doing, which is 7 councilors who don't all agree, who don't all get along. What I try to bring to the table is that we all think together, and hopefully that that inspires more and more people to get involved in their town, because you don't have to agree, but you do have to think together. So.
Yeah, no, and I think that's really important. One of the things that I think you had kind of highlighted when you were getting ready, when you were running for office and you came on here before, was something that I don't know that I'd really thought a whole heck of a lot about. Because so if we look at the trajectory of my understanding of politics, it started national. And then when I decided to run in 2022, I started to when COVID happened, I started to pay a lot more attention to what was happening locally, and ended up running in 2022 and got a much better understanding of what happens. When I say locally, I mean statewide. And only more recently, over the course of the past couple of years, I understood when I came into it, or shortly after I came into it, that for the Republican Party, I'm the chair of the Cumberland County Republicans. The best way to build your bench is to get city council and school board members. So, in a sense, I was looking at those positions as like the farming ground for us to be able to make an impact in Augusta, which is like not exactly the right way to look at it, right? It's actually, those positions are actually extremely important, and some of the most important positions in our world, because what's happening at city council, school board, that has the most direct impact to your life of any policy in our country, in all reality. And so we really need to be hyper focused on those. But I've kind of gone about it the opposite way to get there.
Sure.
Kind of starting with the national focus. I think most people are primarily focused on national politics, much more than they are local. And I think
especially right now, Chuck. I mean, my news feed is just all Maine Senate race, right? So as is everyone else's. So you're 100% right, Chuck. You're 100% right. It is the most influential part of people's lives, whether we realize it or not. But we do have to come to that agreement of self-governance, which is where your town and city operate, is essentially the most American form.
Yeah, it absolutely is, and I think we need to shift in our culture and our society back to I think at one point people might be upset with this, and I just don't care. Nobody's happy with what's going on in Washington, right? Okay, so let's just start there. But like it used to be that the Maine legislature would select the people who would represent us in DC, the senators, not the average citizen. And if you sit there and think, well, that's undemocratic, it's like, well, we're not a democracy. We're a republic, first of all. So that's number one. Number two, it would make your election for your representatives much more important. And it would be people in the state of Maine that could actually have some power to hold accountable the people who are in DC. Right now, as long as they can win a statewide election, what can we do? Right? We have no power over them. But if they're elected by our legislature like they used to be, we're not going back to this. I know that people will not. No. But like it was a better system because you knew and had interactions with your local government and even your state representatives, and then they had actual influence over what your representatives were doing in Washington, D.C. And it just seems like that was the beauty of that kind of system, is it made your local stuff that much more important and caused people to be much more focused on what's going on locally, which I think is really important. I don't think, though, when I say local engagement, that doesn't mean you do what a guy in my town did on Monday, which is go in and talk about how we need to decouple from Israel. Just, even if you have that perspective, I don't think the city council is the place that you bring that. But that's the type of stuff that was the only person that spoke in public comment on Monday. And it's like, okay, well, anyway. But
I think that hits a point, Chuck, is that, one of the things I love most about being involved at the town level, and it certainly didn't happen on purpose. I just kind of once I saw it, I couldn't unsee it. It was kind of one of those things. And, but you get to see the effects of it almost immediately, right? So we approved, finally. So essentially, I'll back up a little bit. So essentially what happened with Lisbon was, we hadn't really had a robust capital improvement plan. And so when I got on the council, I was like, oh, well, that's just not good. I mean, I went to school at MMA and we learned about asset management, and we talk about it, and I'm a contractor for the Navy, and we talk about life cycle engineering and the cost of things over time. And when I realized that the town, hadn't really formulated a comprehensive list of road conditions or catch basins or sidewalks or its buildings, it really hadn't had a comprehensive look at just how many assets we had as a community. And our audits were kind of saying to us, look, you've got a high percentage of depreciated assets. Your cliff is approaching quick. You're running out of time. And so all the federal stimulus stuff, all the tax raises, all that was compounded by the fact that at the local level, we weren't budgeting and planning for the replacement of the things that our services we value depend on. And I think that probably resonates with more people looking to get involved locally than they might realize, right? Why is the community center shutting down? Why are we losing a police officer position in the schools? Why are we doing these things? Why are these cuts having to be made? And I don't think anybody wants to cut for austerity. Well, okay, so some people might want to cut for austerity, but some of us actually believe that government is important, and what we do, we need to do incredibly well. And so in order to do that, we have to be able to maintain the things that we depend on. And so, I just looked at it as a whole, and I was like, we're doing so, we do so many things well, but one thing that we just have to come to understand as a society, I guess, is that we have to plan for the replacement of it, because that sort of didn't happen for our generation. And I'm not trying to pick on the generations that came before. But the country was sort of paved with good intentions, right? We came back from World War II. We didn't want to go into a recession. We built a major interstate system that we couldn't ever possibly maintain. It's why it's always under construction, because the way the funding works at the federal level is still to, incentivized expansion rather than maintenance. And so the entire system is sort of built on this perpetuation of expansion, right? What else can we do? What more can we do? What more service can we provide? Rather than slowing down and asking ourselves, what must we provide and what must we do well, right? We must provide clean elections with the town clerk or the city clerk's office. We must make sure the elections are fair and transparent. We want to make sure we're doing that well. We must make sure our books balance. Our financial records are in state. We're not getting qualified opinions on our audits. We want to make sure that those things are done well. We must do those things well. We've got to do public safety well. When my mom calls 911, I want to make sure an ambulance shows up. These are the things that government actually has to exist to do, and it can't exist to do them if it's being threatened by the very own system that made itself too big, essentially. And so when you get into it and you look at your city and you're, man, why are these cuts coming? I get that feeling that nobody wants to see that, right? I mean, but at the same time, I'm not going to assume, Charlie, I'm not going to assume that my kids' generation is going to have it better than me and that they should inherit my bad decisions. So one of the things I think I'm a little bit different than the average town councilor is I don't just look at the budget in front of me this year or the decision in front of me today. I try to look at how does this affect the next council? How does this affect the new taxpayers coming into town who who didn't know all the problems or the history of the town, or are just trying to make a go of it with their family. And so how do you preserve the past that people love, and while also making sure that the future is sustainable? And it's a really tricky thing, but I think it's going to take ground up movements of people understanding that those decisions at your town and city level, ultimately you will pay for them one way or the other. And so
Well, I think it's interesting.
A call to people to get involved, Chuck. I mean, it's people need to pay attention.
We do, and we need to, like, we have to work hard to, like, read between the lines and understand. It's interesting, like, every new spend that happens in my town in particular is they act as though it's an isolated thing, right? But one of the things that I called it in a recent in a recent thing is death by 1,000 cuts, right?
Yeah.
Right? That's the idea. And so, like, the school board right now, the city council, I should say, is entertaining two proposals that they're going to spend more money on. And after we just, like, had a multiple large increases a couple of years ago, for some people, their taxes went up 20%, and I think we had the highest tax increase maybe of any town in the state, in the nation that year. It was something like that, at the very least in Maine. And it was just like an astronomical increase, and we've continued to have these, like, high increases. People express frustration. The city council is like, oh, I know it's tough, but these things are necessities, right? These things are important. We make sure. And I think they're lying outright, number one. But number two, like, so I'll give you the example of two things that they're currently considering, right? One is to give all seniors bus passes, not to get to school, but for other reasons, that it would be beneficial for high schoolers, 700 kids, to have bus passes through the metro. And, like, if we were, one of the things that I sometimes say when we're talking about this stuff is, like, if we were, like, flowing in cash and had all this extra money and everybody at home was happy to pay their taxes, and we had the ability to do something like that, and you could make an argument that it makes sense for the taxpayer to do it, which I think that's a whole nother story. Okay, sure. But that's not the environment we're in. Like, people are frustrated. People are struggling. The economy is in a difficult spot here in Maine, I think largely because of policy coming out of Augusta. But, like, this is just another thing on top of that. And in addition to that, there's a trail that's a biking trail that the state wants to expand basically from Portland, I think, all the way to Bridgeton. And Westbrook would be required to pay $800,000 of, like, $16 million to get the trail from Westbrook to Wyndham. Wyndham would have to pay the other. Basically, there's like $8 million.
Their leg of it, yeah, they'd have to pay.
Right, they would $800,000, and it's like, okay, the way that they present these things is like, okay, well, it's only $800,000 for us, but it's like the rest of it's being funded by the state government. It's like, okay, well, who funds the state government?
Yeah.
Oh, that would be the taxpayer. Right, that would be the taxpayer. Or again, and then what? And down the road, we're going to have to maintain this, right? There's going to be costs associated with maintaining it. But on top of the fact that, like, again, if we were in a different environment where, like, we weren't struggling with the amount of money that they've already raised the taxes in, then that's one thing. But we're in this current environment, and it seems like adding on these additional things when people are frustrated with the cost of things is, like, an attitude from our city council that we just don't care about anybody who's struggling. We're going to keep spending money.
Yeah, and I think that resonates with a lot of people, Chuck. I say for every person who gets up to the podium at a town council meeting, 10 people hit me up via Facebook Messenger or email. And so when I'm sitting at the dais, I am trying to actually accurately represent the majority of people. Because if it was up to, if I had a crown and I was king for a day, I would take almost the entire town budget and put it into infrastructure. Because when you have 70+% depreciated assets, and you're struggling to get business development to move in, and all you're really getting is residential, those are two very conflicting issues, right? So residential never pays for itself. That's where commercial and industrial comes in. And if you don't have the infrastructure base to support freight, or to entice them to choose you over Topsom, or to choose you over Lewiston, you're kind of fighting with one hand behind your back as a community. And so that becomes incredibly difficult to to understand. But to your point, I mean, it's really more simple than people make it, because they do have to ask themselves, and then what? And that's just
Yeah.
one of the questions that doesn't get asked. And I found it didn't get asked at all. And if you ask, and I'll back up a little bit too, there's certain departments that we sort of give a free pass to in towns and city governments, right? And I adore educators. My wife's a teacher.
Yeah.
But we give a free pass. You can't question a school budget or you're anti-education, and you can't question a police budget or you want to defund the police, or you can't question a model we're delivering for economic development or you're anti-economic development. And I think we have to get away from reacting to every single thing that people are trying to have a conversation about, and actually just kind of engage with the facts and get to a point where we can just have productive conversations. Because nobody defunded the police in any successful town or city. Nobody stops teachers from teaching in any successful town or city. I think there's shared values that we have as Americans, and we just kind of have to get back to that mentality of finding what we're good at agreeing on rather than focusing on what we disagree on. And so, yeah, for me as a leader, that's a struggle, because you're trying to make group decisions. You're not king. There's no mayor in Lisbon. There's a council with 7 members and several various committees who are working at sometimes cross purposes. And so you have a development committee that hasn't met with the finance committee. So we're going to add all these homes and they're going to bring in all this revenue, but we haven't talked about what the cost of maintaining those or adding them to the school system or adding them to the police budget is actually going to be. And so we really have to find a way to get everybody sort of kind of to come together on all the things that they're working on and all the things that are important to them. And we have to do that in all of Maine, because Maine is struggling. Maine is in a rough place, Chuck. I mean, I spent my whole life here. I grew up, like I said, in Durham. I split my childhood between Durham and Freeport, and I've lived in Lisbon since 2013, but I never left. I've lived in Waldoboro, I've lived in Farmington, I've lived in Brunswick, graduated from Brunswick High School. I've seen enough to know that the issues you're seeing in Westbrook, the issues I'm seeing in Lisbon are similar, and it's widespread. Because Maine is an old state, and so we have old infrastructure, and we have an aging population, and we have low economic development, and we have mandates that come down from Augusta to the town and city levels that are unfunded, and puts pressure on the real budgets that people depend on, right? I mean, it is absolutely unfair. It has to change, and I think that change has to happen from people coming to an understanding that no one's out to get anyone. And if you think otherwise, you're entitled to think that. But at the end of the day, we're just trying to have productive conversations, because that's what self-governance requires. It requires participation.
Yeah, and I think that's the part that most Americans don't want to do. They just want to, I don't know, for whatever reason, pay attention to either CNN or Fox News. And I just have a hint for you who are watching either of those: turn them off, please. Thank you. Those are not great places to get information. They're great places to get very biased perspectives if that's what you're looking for. But if you're looking for information, that's not where I would go. And so anyway, we need
to expand on that, we've kind of developed a vending machine mentality where people put in $1 and they expect the service to come out, and when the service inevitably doesn't come out the way that they expected, they kick it. Sometimes they take a chainsaw to it. Sometimes they blow it up with they dissect the frog with the hand grenade, is what I referred to it as. And I just think that we have to get back to a barn raising mentality. America grew incrementally, and we became the most powerful nation in the world, not because of one singular decision, but because communities made small bets on themselves and built each other up. I mean, my family comes from French Canadian immigrants who built the mills in Holyoke, Lewiston, Biddeford, all across New England, Manchester, all across New England, and they participated in their locality, and they participated in making it better. And I'm sure that there were people who didn't like their ideas at the time, right? But ultimately, as long as you're bringing an idea to the table, I'm a fan. And I think that we really struggle with that, is getting out of our own way, I guess, is the way I want to look at it. We just have to be okay that people might disagree from time to time. that has to come back to being that common sense you talked about at the beginning. Like, we have to accept that we're not all going to agree on everything, but we can all agree on the direction is unsustainable. The direction is not better for the next generation. The direction is just it's all out war when it comes to an aging population facing those cost pressures that you talked about, and being taxed out of their homes or being taxed out of their livelihood is just one of the most, I think, un-American things you can possibly do. And so I think government has a responsibility, and the citizens have a responsibility to each other to ensure that that doesn't happen. But that's just me.
No, and that's like, again, what's important is like that we can make a difference, but we need to engage, and we need to do the best that we can to engage civilly, even with people with whom we disagree. But also like call them to the carpet and make sure that we keep bringing up the areas. Like, I think one of the things that again, I hadn't heard a lot of people talk about it because we don't talk a lot about the city government even in our media, right? We're not doing enough to talk about what's going on there. I wish I was doing more, and hopefully I will over time. Appreciate you coming on because it helps, right? With that. But is the idea, and I may have lost you, I'm not sure, but of long-term planning in budgets and thinking about like not just what are the costs now, but what are the costs in the future? What are the things that we're going to need to replace? And I remember back years ago, I lived in the Wilton area, and I was actually on a committee for looking at trying to help. I think it was a Wilton Downtown Committee or something like that. But anyway, I don't think we decided anything along these lines at this point. But while I was doing that, it became apparent that the city of Wilton, I should say, not Westbrook, that's where I am now. The city of Wilton was going to need to make a substantial change or investment in the infrastructure of the sewer system that they had basically just neglected for 30 years. Whereas if they had had a perspective like yours and said, okay, we know we're going to need to do this over time. Let's make sure that instead of like getting the new fire engine when we don't necessarily need it, or spending focused on what we can spend and what we can get a grant for now, let's budget for the things that we know we're going to need to do. Instead, what happened was your sewage rates like went up by about 60%. And on top of that, they also taxed everybody in the town, not including people who do not have access to the sewer system, right? So because of really poor planning, we're put in this position where costs all of a sudden out of nowhere go up a dramatic amount. And this was like probably 4 or 5 years ago, maybe even before COVID. I can't remember exactly, but it was a substantial increase. And I think a lot of people were not prepared for it. And again, you got all these people that are living on fixed incomes, and now their taxes and their quarterly water and sewer bills jump up. And all of a sudden it's like, whoa, I mean, I was already struggling. Inflation is now happening. And here we are with this huge increase. It also came at around a time that they did reevaluations on people's properties. And so some people's property value went up a lot. And so their taxes were going to go up anyway. And on top of that, you got all these other things like that. Those are the types of things that our city governments are doing that are really inappropriate. So I was really appreciative of you talking about this idea of like, we need to be involved in planning how we're going to afford. We know the things that we have, and rather than waiting until something goes broke and then putting out for bond, what if we actually thought about that ahead of time and planned for it and asked some questions of like, what can we reasonably afford without overburdening our tax base, our taxpayers?
100%. And I go back to my professional training. One of the things I was taught was if the margins are thin, you need to ask better questions. And I think many Maine communities, from Aroostook County down to, I'll probably rule out most of York County and Cumberland County, but they still have struggles. But there's certainly a certain level of affluence in Maine that exists, and we shouldn't pretend that it doesn't. But many communities in Maine aren't affluent, and so many communities are struggling just to provide those basic things I talked about earlier. And what they end up doing, Chuck, and it's really kind of tragic, is they don't budget, they don't plan for maintenance, they defer, right? They maybe next year will be better. If we just get the paper mill to open back up, or if we just get that AI, I mean, I really feel for the people of Jay with the AI data center, right? Because they really know that town depended on the paper mill for so long and are just desperate to have an economic boom back in their town. And one of the beautiful things about Lisbon was it was an industrial town, a powerhouse even. The Warumbo Mill, the Farwell Mill, and I can't. The other one's escaping me at this time. But Lisbon has a very proud industrial past, and it is no longer an industrial town. It is a highly sought after residential community, and so that sort of history collides in Maine, all across Maine, Bucksport, Jay, Livermore Falls, Lincoln, you name it, right? I mean, many communities are struggling with re-identifying what they are going to be in the future. And I guess what I'm trying to say is we just have to figure it out as a group and move out, because what the worst thing we can do is do nothing. And so Maine does need to get creative with bringing in some economic activity. And I think that ultimately, to lower the burden off of our most vulnerable people, which is our seniors and our children, we have to do something differently. I mean, doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result, I think you probably agree, is the definition of insanity. And and yet here we are. I mean, every time I see new legislation passed, I know it's going to be a mandate that dies at appropriations up in Augusta. And so it's really frustrating. And it's frustrating to be a city councilor or a town councilor at times, because people expect you to stop the housing development, per se, or they expect you to get in the way of the next project. And your councilors are really limited. They're really limited to what the town budget is. They can hear your concerns and even share your concerns. I share some of the concerns with adding more kids to the Lisbon school system. I share that concern as a teacher's husband and as a parent of children in the school system. But that doesn't mean that I can go out and unilaterally, get in front of an excavator and stop it from happening. We just have this grand illusion sometimes that someone else is going to fix it for us, but the fix has to come from the everyday people, the people getting involved, the people speaking up, and as you called it, pulling them out on the carpet. I mean, we just have to say enough's enough. You can't tax my grandma out of her home. You can't also completely give up on the next generation and just saddle them with tremendous amounts of debt because we didn't have the foresight to budget. And so, Maine is in for a growing pains of accepting that we can't just do everything the way we've always done them, because we're not in the same Maine. I told you earlier, I've lived here my whole life. It's just not the same. And I'm not saying that's a good or bad thing. I'm simply saying it's time to work with the facts and work with reality. And we're going to have to think differently. And I think there's a comment or a quote that goes back to Winston Churchill, where someone in his war cabinet said, gentlemen, we're out of money. We are going to have to think. And so I really think that that's going to resonate with Mainers every day when they start to get involved at their local level. As we are out of money, we're going to have to think.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, going back to your comment about like doing the same thing over and over again, I don't know if you said this exactly, but like basically doing the same thing and expecting different results is the definition of insanity, right? So you're not here to talk about state politics, but I'm going to, and say, Hannah Pingree is Janet Mills 2.0. Over the course of the last 8 years, we've seen the budget grow. We've seen economics get much worse and much more challenging, much more difficult to have, sustain, grow a business, which has led to so many businesses closing down and them not being replaced with new businesses for the most part. And so we need to not be insane as a state and not vote in the person who is basically just going to carry on and do the exact same thing, which is make the state worse and blame Trump, even though Trump was not in office for, at this point, the majority of Janet Mills' term. I mean, at the end of it, it'll be an equal amount Trump and equal amount Biden. But the reality is, like, things got worse no matter who the president was. Our energy prices continue to rise and skyrocket, amongst other things. And so we need, in this state, we need change. We need it to start, as Charlie is saying here, at the ground level. We need to get involved. We need to run for office. We need to support people who are running for office. And I think you would agree, we need to show up to city council meetings and share our frustrations. It's a tough job to be a city councilor or town councilor or selectman. When you want to do the right thing, if you don't have the people coming and speaking up, saying it publicly, that gives you a lot more leverage in the conversation at the meeting to be able to say, see, this is what the people are asking for. And so we need people to show up and obviously do it in a way that's respectful, focused on the data, the facts, not rhetoric and emotions, and really be able to help you guys do your job, and get involved in things like the planning board and the finance committee and all these other different areas where people can get involved. We need that. And also I think that will help things upward as well. So I encourage you to do that.
Yeah, I think that what you were talking about for the state level is very true, actually. And at the town level and city level, what residents need to remember is, and your city councilors and your town councilors and even your school board members should be, looking at things through a different lens than a resident would. But we're still residents. And so, I don't get to make changes to a solid waste operation that don't affect me directly. I don't get to make changes to a school budget if I'm on a school committee that don't affect my neighbor's kids or my kids or my nephews or nieces. These changes that happen at a local level have real implications, and they do affect the people who make those decisions, and they make them anyway. And so, a plea to get involved, because I think that there will be a lot less anger at the decisions that get made if you're actually paying attention the entire way through, rather than just when it becomes an inconvenience. And that's kind of the beauty of the 250th, birthday this year, Chuck, was, 250 years ago, our founding fathers set out to practice self-governance. And, it's we the people, it's for the people, by the people, of the people. It is the most quintessential thing we can do at the local level is get involved and actually pay attention, because I'm not some distant person who has an office on Pennsylvania Avenue down in DC or even up in Augusta. I work full time. I coach baseball, softball, whatever is needed, and then I go and I do town council work as a part-time job, and it is by far the worst paying part-time job. And I didn't get involved in it for the money. But it's essentially a volunteer who's willing to stand up there, take criticism, take insults, and still carry on and try to steer the town the best way you can. And at the end of the day, if we can put aside what we disagree about and actually focus on what we agree about, I think we will find that there's more Mainers who want to preserve the good things about Maine, while also accepting that change is needed. And so hopefully more and more people are starting to get involved, because they're recognizing that these changes have consequences, and the way we vote can't just always be a rubber stamp. We're going to have dissent. We are a council in Lisbon that sometimes goes to 4-3, and you don't see that as often as you should. There should be a wide variety of perspectives on your council. There should be a wide variety of inputs. There should be just good dialogue every single time they're sitting up on the dais. And if we can't get to that as a state and as communities in this state, I'm pretty fearful for what it means for the next generation of what they'll inherit. So,
yeah. So it's urgent. We need to get things taken care of in the here and now and soon. So, so thank you.
We're running out of time. We are running out of time as a state.
Yeah. No, I mean, ultimately, like we need to make changes very soon, because we need to, it's going to get, even if we are able to get in and whether it's in a different school board or city council situation like you've just kind of taken over, even, starting to fix it now, it's going to take a while before, it's actually fixed, right? It's not, you can make a significant impact in a short period of time, but it's not fixed yet.
You know,
right?
we didn't get here overnight. I mean, it has been you talked about the death by 1,000 cuts. I mean, it is a grinding motion more than a blast. And that grind is actually why I feel people are disengaged and why people don't want to speak up, because they feel like, well, what can you do? And I'm trying to tell people you can do a lot, and you can do a lot, and a lot of good, by just coming to the table, by just getting up, by just showing up. So I encourage and implore and beg people to get involved. I mean, because I think that the more opinions we have, the better decision we're going to get. And if we as a group value long-term honesty over the long term versus short-term, makes us feel good. We employed, people in eleomasonary activity, and we felt really good. It sounded great. We're going to get a different outcome if we value long-term honesty, as a priority.
Yeah. No, we definitely. We can make a difference if we get involved, and I think we need to make sure we do that. So thank you again. Thank you so much for not only making the effort to run and be a good town councilor in your town to try and right the ship there, but also kind of speak out to encourage other people to do the same, and that there is hope. And again, I was highlighting the fact that Lisbon is in southern Maine because we can even do it here in southern Maine. And so there is there is an opportunity here, and we just need to capitalize on it. We need to understand what's going on in our town, and I think do what you did, which is before you run, you get involved, you ask questions, you start to get yourself educated, and get to the point where you're more educated than the other people on the city council, and then run against them if that's what you need to do. Hopefully you can make a change without necessarily having to run. But more likely than not, that's going to be what's necessary. Is we're going to need new people. Not everybody's job is to run for office. However, getting yourself educated really can help in the event that we get somebody, get the right candidate. And so I appreciate you again speaking up, standing up, and then also speaking up to be able to help our great state and focusing first and foremost on the city of Lewiston, or town of Lisbon. Is it a town or a city?
Little brother of city of Lewiston, town of Lisbon.
Town of Lisbon. Okay, that's what I thought.
Right next door.
So,
right next door.
Yeah. So thanks again. And is there anything else you'd like to share before we go?
No, hey, thanks for what you do. Thanks for allowing a platform like you talked about. There really isn't much local media these days, but these issues matter and these people matter. And it's going to take more than one counselor or one council even. It's going to take everyone. So, I care deeply about Maine, and I know this podcast does too. So that's why I'm always willing to come on.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. We appreciate it. And thank you all for watching or listening, and we'll see you back here probably next week. Thanks.